So then, we are back with more understandings from the time of the Second Tabernacle services, where we find the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Israelic lineage, so then we can understand the time of the end as per Yeshayahu the prophet. We find layers of understanding of the spring feast, the autumn feast, and also the returning of the cities of the Messiah laid waste from many centuries. As we read then Yeshayahu, this particular prophet is always the basis of understanding the holy instructions as far as the future prophecies and many situations regarding then the Messiah, the very center focus of the entire restoration period. Plus then the layer of the Gentiles, where we understand then outside of tabernacling what's going on with the world and how then the nations should play out as we then, in quote, march ourselves towards vengeance or then the autumn feast. Let's then make a very quick reading of the 11th chapter of Daniel, because there are a few considerations we should then read and understand in the importance of studying the Eastern culture as far as the Hebraic culture, and then the first son of Ibrahim, Ishmael, and the importance of understanding also the trade and how this plays out amongst the sons of Ishmael. So then, as far as we can understand from the holy instructions, when we read Daniel the 11th chapter, there is a section related with the 8th verse, extremely important, because the 8th and 9th, there are some areas of the translation that they are lacking a bit of information. However, this information does not change the other layers prophesied by the other prophets. Let's then understand this factor, because the 8th verse explains then Egypt was then one of the major forces in power when Egypt was then active many centuries ago, and then explains then the gold and the silver and the molten images went into exile for a time. There is not a relation with the exile of the Hebrews coming out of Egypt or the sword. We are purely explaining layers of understanding of the Gentile level, because Daniel the prophet was primarily a person working on behalf of the king to do trade for and on behalf of the king. Because of these, then is pertinent. Every time we have a reading of Daniel, we are reading from a trade's viewpoint and not tabernacling. So when we read Egypt, there is not a link with the Hebrews coming out of Egypt. It does not mention of the Hebrew people then being exiled in Egypt. And the translators throughout many centuries, when they were editing, they had a tendency of shifting the existing understanding to their own story. These should never take place on the 11th chapter of Daniel, because it explains very precisely an area of the holy instructions related with the Gentiles. As we understand, reading the 8th verse, then there is a word in Hebrew where then we read, for instance, then these items, the silver and gold, what Egypt had, went into exile for a time, and he shalt stand from the kingdom of the north, explaining of Egypt, receiving then arms from the Soviet Union. We should then obviously make a projection from the time of Daniel. He was explaining of the future, because we are during the time of the base of the statue. So based from the base of the statue, then iron does not mix with the clay, and we are studying then the relationship with these nations that are iron. And then, further reading, then we find a skirmishes of Egypt and a relation with their brothers. So then, Hagar was an Egyptian mate. She has Egyptian background. The sons of Ishmael and the Arab nations, they have a background from this lady Hagar, and she was an Egyptian. So the Arabs, they have in themselves half Egyptian, half Hebrew. So let's then understand how these nations are moving towards each other. Then there is a Hebrew word of thronging or throng, explaining then Egypt comes down and goes to the kingdom of the south and then return to his own land. This word throng is in the midst of this section of the 9th and 10th verses, explaining then Egypt as from where these nations they came from the relationship of Hagar and Ibrahim. Thus then Egypt goes south and then returns to his land. But then this understanding of Egypt then going south is related obviously with the sons of Ishmael and Isaac, what they are doing at the moment. As we understand from the news, they are joining themselves because they understand there is a promise coming towards these people. However, they have their beliefs very strongly in what they want, and then Egypt must become a power force, and they are going to be thronging each other. It's not the word war. The word is not used as a war because it's not related with other nations and strangers from each other. They have the same lineage. So they are thronging each other for some time. Then explains after Egypt then returned to its land, and then the sons, or then the remainder of these thronging of Egypt and Isaac and the sons of Ishmael, then they get a bit stirred up. And then they shall gather a multitude of forces and goes then against the flow. Flow simply means what the world is doing at the moment. For instance, United States and Great Britain, and what the civilized, in quote, or we consider this civilized world should be. And they go against this flow. And then continues on this relationship, and then obviously they become furious. Because there is then Egypt becoming strong. Obviously they're going to have a link with the West world, trying to obviously strengthening itself in the West. And then the situation is going to make then the sons of Ishmael very furious. So then there is a set of understandings from these where we should be absolutely studied of the culture of these people. And as we read then further, then comes to a point where even the Soviet Union is then involved. So there are many topics of this situation, but at this time it is truly enough for us to understand that Egypt is returning. Egypt then is receiving arms from the Soviet Union, and then they're going to be thronging with these ISIL, and then as they are thronging with each other, then obviously there is a relationship with Egypt and ISIL, and they're going to change their parameters. But then as they do this and they simply rest from these, then the sons of those then are going to be once again thronging each other, or then stirring up, and shall gather then a huge flow. We understand there is a flow over there. There's themselves going through this flow of what then the West and the world they are wishing for. As the world then is changing, it's becoming more from the time of Ibrahim, and the culture of the holy instructions, or the Eastern culture, then is truly becoming prominent in this world. Then what they believe does not line up with the existing flow. So the flow of these people of the East goes again against of this flow that it has in the world for a long time. Thus then the time of deceit. Then later on you find that they become furious then with the kingdom of the south, with Egypt. Noted then later going to evaluate then the word then northbound versus kingdom of the north. In some areas, for instance in the 11th verse explains kingdom of the north, but it's not kingdom of the north. It's going northward towards then the kingdom of the south, explaining of Egypt. Because of this relationship that Egypt has and became very strong because of the arms of the Soviet Union, and then there is a link with Egypt and the West. That's why then they become infuriated, because the West has no hint of Islamic teachings or the Quran. They have scandalized the scripture, and they believe in a God that simply doesn't exist. And later on continues then, I'm going to go through each of these then and understand these portions until reaches then the violent ones. And then from then on, also important, the establishment of the vision. These truly has a direct relation with tabernacling on the land of Cush. So these situations, they are easily set as you read and understand the Eastern culture and the holy words of Hebrew, and then understand we are in the very midst of the relationship of Egypt becoming stronger, receiving arms from the Soviet Union, and then thronging around with the sons of Ishmael, because Egypt and the Arab nations, they are from the same lineage. And because of these, the word war is not used, but yet thronging. It's like the same brothers, for instance, brothers of the same family, having a dispute of some sort. So later on I'm going to study more of these, and understandably this situation is purely related with Gentiles until it reaches the area of establishing the vision. This truly is directly related with tabernacling. When we read, for instance, this section, we instantly go then and study Yeshayahu the prophet, chapter 1:8. That's where tabernacling is at, and the returning of the cities, the first holy city on the land of Cush. So then, until this portion, we understand roughly yet what's coming, and should be enough until Egypt then becomes stronger, and then the Soviet Union then returns. It already has returned, but they have to work out some of those problems amongst themselves, and understand they are then the provider of arms of many nations, and they must become greater than the former, because one explains north, kingdom of the north, chapter 1:4, relates truly with the kingdom of the north and not northbound. That's why sometimes it's very confusing understanding this situation, because you have armies going northbound towards the kingdom of the north, that is Egypt. Then you understand going south then would be south of then Israel. And sometimes you have then kingdom of the north truly is then the Soviet Union, kingdom of the south then truly Africa, and then earlier the kingdom of the east, then China. And speaking of China, there is also another situation we should be very concerned with, because came out in the news some time ago related with the banking of China. US then is obviously involved with these new war novels, and the situation is becoming very critical because in 6 months' time we should have more banks, private banks, involved with virtual monetary systems exclusively used for e-trade. It was given then some time ago, merely a couple of years plus ago, explaining many times, said myself, the system is coming, the Chinese system is coming, the Chinese system is coming, and truly is very near. The Chinese system has come. Alibaba, for instance, is the very most top system of the United States, based from the East, Kingdom of the East. And then in 6 months' time, the private banks then are going to start doing exclusive payments of e-trade. Not only this, but they are going to have also money to lend. So icons, when they have their computers on, they can they can receive money even from a lending of a bank while investing on products. And then, as it was said before, then the checkings and the savings, they can use this money and then invest, as the Chinese then names, the leftover treasure. They can invest their checking, they can invest their savings, and they receive much higher yields than living in a regular bank. Can you remind yourselves, the skeleton crew of a bank and so on? So we are roughly 6 months' time from this period. So US has not much time left to get their acts together as far as their banking and the Federal Reserve, and how they are going to invest themselves in this new system, because there is not much to invest on in the United States. It's simply war, destruction, and they they have a hard time leaving this war-mongering type of mindset. So then, as we find this very true, you can verify by yourself. You can go online and find those articles. But in 6 months' time, you can be sure of it, many more private banks are going to come up and giving total and absolutely complete focus for those people who are doing e-trade. So the system is becoming very fast and electronic, and the old world simply is becoming far behind. So then, next time I'm going to evaluate more of the situation, because the Kingdom of the East is becoming stronger every day. And then the European Union, unfortunately, is stagnated. The Eurozone was a failure. If it wasn't for the Chinese premier going over there and saving Germany, then the Eurozone was going down. So let's remind ourselves of being thankful for God Himself to come up with a system that was able at least to save these, though they are junky. They must understand their system have failed. And China is truly becoming the first of the world. Next time I'm going to evaluate China, this new system, and more verses from Daniel the 11th chapter. So please stay tuned. Much more coming up.